It's 10 a.m. Welcome to the Big Talks. Comes up Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays on the Classic Morning Show. Today, we're looking at the impact of U.S. aid suspension in Africa, especially Nigeria, implications for Nigeria's economy and development. Now, for decades, the United States has been a major donor to Africa, providing billions of dollars in development aid, humanitarian assistance, and security funding. Nigeria, as the largest economy in Africa, has benefited significantly from US aid in areas such as healthcare, education, infrastructure, and security. However, recent discussions about reducing or suspending aid to Africa due to geopolitical shifts, governors' concern, or budget constraints could have serious consequences. Now, today's discussion explores the role of US aid in Africa, its significance to Nigeria, and potential socio-economic and political fallout if such funding is withdrawn or reduced. Now, my guest is a seasoned leader in Nigeria's civil society space with extensive experience in advocacy, governance, and community development, having held key leadership positions in NGOs and development agencies. He has successfully mobilized funding and international aid for projects in police reform, security, and social impact. His expertise in fundraising, donor engagement, and policy advocacy has driven impactful programs benefiting thousands of people. He is committed to sustainable development. He champions local resource mobilization and transparency in aid utilization, leaving a legacy of accountability and transformative leadership. And also, he is currently managing partner at Benson Olugbo and Company. Is Dr. Benson Olugbo. You're welcome to the program this morning, sir.
Thank you, Tohan.
Good to have you.
Was that me?
I didn't add that you have raised billions of dollars in aid. I didn't want to add that to it so that people wait for you at the front of the office when you're done with the interview. But it's
Wow.
good to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for joining us this
Happy
morning.
New Year.
Happy New Year. You look good, sir. No one will know that you've spent how many years, in the space raising billions of dollars. I'll always love to add that part.
Wow.
But you know what? You're welcome.
Thank you.
How did you receive the news of the suspension? When this news broke out after Donald Trump assumed office as president of the United States.
I received it with a mixed feeling. Interestingly, a lot of Nigerians, also a lot of Africans, interestingly actually support Donald Trump. Some people see him as somebody who bring America back to the right path, depending on your own definition of the right path. So I see a lot of Nigerians supporting Donald Trump. So interestingly, his policies will always affect people. And I think from the beginning, when he started making plans to come back, he made it very clear. There are plans to focus on the US. And of course, it's obvious from the executive orders that were signed when he came into office.
Yes.
One of them is this review, about foreign aid. So for me, it's a mixed feeling because we've also been hearing different stories about what is happening in Nigeria. So the reality is that the one of the executive orders freezes foreign aid for 3 months.
Yes.
The understanding is that there's going to be a review, and the review will consider whether this foreign aid that has been in different parts of the world meets with the current American government, ideology. And so if it does, then they will continue. If it doesn't, of course, they are cancelled. The other part of it is USAID activities and global USAID activities is currently frozen.
That's right.
So we've had instances where colleagues who went for conferences. I spoke with a colleague over the weekend, and he was in Senegal for a conference, and some Americans also were there. By the time they were arriving, there was an email that nothing should happen.
Wow.
So my colleague came back. His friends had to fly back to the US without anybody holding any meeting.
That's serious.
Yes. I've also had people who traveled to Lagos and different parts of the country, and after the first day, the organizers said they received an email that that should be the end of the program, and people had to travel back to their base.
Wow, that's the current reality.
That's the current reality. And I've also had stories of staff in Nigeria, of organizations that receive funding from American organizations that got sack letters. Everybody in the organization was sacked. Um, there are some that have reached out to their funders and they have promised that they're going to pay them for the next 3 months, but that they cannot guarantee anything after the next 3 months.
Wow.
There are some that the organization is what you can call frozen. So there's no activity, there's no funding until the next 3 months. So it's a mixed feeling. And the worry is I wrote an article recently about maternal and infant mortality in
Yes, I
Nigeria,
saw that
which
on
is
your
very
LinkedIn
high.
page. Yes.
And so some people reached out to me and said it will still affect that most of these projects, whether it's SWAP or MAMI and all those things.
Yes.
Some of them are also heavily funded through foreign aid. And of course, USAID also has their hands in different pies in
I
terms of
agree.
development in Nigeria. I cannot say specifically they are the ones bankrolling SWAP or um, the initiative by the government on cesarean section. But I can say to an extent that some of these innovative programs we've had in the health sector may be impacted.
Maybe impacted.
Yes.
All right. Now, moving to a particular school of thought, I would want to hear your analysis on this. Now, many Nigerians assume that the West gives aids to Nigeria or Africa because it's just a way of making a subtle payment back for maybe things that they might have done in the past. So Nigerians believe that there's no such thing as kindness when aids are given. That there's a subtle payback of which we do not know what they're paying back for. But what's your thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, I read a lot of literature in
Mm.
terms of, aid, for third world countries. If you read 12 arguments, third world approaches to international law,
Yeah.
and several arguments that have been made that, the aid trajectory, one, is not sustainable, and I agree with that. And two, there's really something. And the reality is, speaking from my own experience now, is that unfortunately, majority of the end funds also go back, because if you see some of the contracts, you are meant to purchase from particular um, contractors. You are meant to hire some particular professionals who are not locals anyway.
Yes.
And they, interestingly, the chunk of the funds actually go to those people. And sometimes also some people fly into Nigeria as expats. I mean, people who've been here like 2 weeks, 1 year, and then they act as expats and somehow receive very generous funds in terms of their professionalism and the rest of it. So, well, one cannot say that or those school of thoughts are 100% correct. But the reality is that the aid dynamics has its own problems, because nobody really gives you anything free of
For
charge.
free.
There's always something
Okay.
going on. So we've seen instances where there are training programs and the people who are handling those training programs are not as professionalized as the people who are receiving those training programs.
Okay.
We've seen instances where um, some contracts you are meant to buy from particular places, you are meant to shop from particular areas. So there are limitations. You are supposed to fly with some airlines. You're not
okay.
those things.
Yes.
So
Yes.
and which limits your ability actually to use the funds.
I
And
see.
and sometimes you could be given a donor could give you like $1,000 and you end up spending like maybe 600. The 400 goes back.
You
But
retire it.
you have to retire back. You have to send back the money.
Okay.
But up there, he said, okay, you received $1,000,
$1,000.
but you were not able to spend $1,000 for one reason or the other. You understand? So that's the limitations. I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe that Nigeria has the money to fund most of these activities if the money that we generate in Nigeria is effectively utilized. But maybe that discussion for another day.
No, we need to focus on the discussion because if you say that there's a chance we do have the money, because you say you might be wrong, but there's a chance that the money is available. So why doesn't our government, deem it fit to push monies into those sectors?
That is a problem of governance, accountability, and transparency. The reality is, probably, maybe this could just be a wake up call for us because every year we do budgeting. Currently, of course, there's a budget cycle that is going on.
We're on it.
Yes, and a lot of senators are working out that I mean, I saw one committee meeting, and they said the document before them was not the document that was being read
Mm-hmm.
at the floor, and they said they needed that document.
Exactly.
So we just do our budget um, just like that. There is no much involvement of citizens to actually understand. I know there are several civil society organizations who try to bring up citizen input into the budgeting and the rest of it. But the time has come, because the reality now is that this donor foreign aid is not sustainable. So we have to make do with what we have. And that means government has to really look into the budgeting cycle. How can we benefit?
Mm.
Because what happens at the end of the day is that some of these budgets are just recycled.
Mm.
And you ask yourself, how does it benefit the people? So sometimes in code we say, okay, we're going to use aid to augment, but we're not actually using aid to augment. What happens in reality is that most government agencies focus on foreign aid, and then the ones that we should use, which is our own money that is raised locally, siphoned.
Mm.
People just steal the money, and there's no accountability
That's
and
it.
transparency. So in Nigeria, you will hear government agencies stealing a lot of money. Even as we are speaking, Abacha loot is still being brought back. And the unfortunate thing is, sometimes when these monies are brought back, they are reluted. So, and then also the judiciary, you find out where somebody has stolen a lot of money, and the person is given a very interesting option of
Mm.
paying fine.
Mm.
Maybe you just pay a fraction
Mm.
of the money you have stolen, and then you walk free.
You walk free.
Yeah. So
There are a
I
lot of
think,
hinges.
yeah,
Yeah, I
I think
agree.
it's time for us to actually look around us and ask ourselves, where did the rain start beating us? Because if you don't know how that question, you might not know
You
where
might
the
never know where the solution will be or how
yes,
to get a raincoat to get out of the rain.
yes.
Okay, so looking at you're a security expert and having raised billions for police reform and security issues. What impact has this suspension got on security?
So it depends on the prism you're looking at. It depends on where you're sitting. Um, the security sector is well funded as far as I'm concerned, even though we know um, also depends on what you mean by security. You
Uh-huh.
know,
Mm.
so you have the armed forces, you have the police, you have the civil and um,
Civil defense.
civil defense,
Yeah.
then you have the paramilitary and all those things.
Yes.
Um, I think but the police has one of maybe the weakest link in terms of funding. That's my own assessment, personal assessment. I believe the military somehow enjoys a lot of
Majority.
a lot of
Okay.
patronage from the government,
Okay.
even though we've had instances where former chief of army staff, went to defend the budget and said the security budget should not be scrutinized because we're under a war situation. I don't think that's right.
Okay.
I believe that any money that is being earmarked for use by any arm of government should be scrutinized. Um, so, for me, I believe there is need for us to review what we already have, because if you also look at the Nigerian not Nigerian armed forces, the Nigerian police force,
Yes.
there's the police trust fund. The essence of that police trust fund is to get some funds that will support buying of equipment, training of personnel, and all this.
Yeah.
But since that fund was established, it has been mired in controversy. There's
Mm.
always been a fight between the chairman and the executive secretary. And then purchase of weapons and purchase of materials. The argument is that some of the things that have been purchased are substandard.
Okay.
I don't work there.
So you can't answer that
I
question.
can answer that question.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, when you discuss with some police officers who want to talk behind official circles, they tell you that the police trust fund has not lived to expectation.
Mm.
The reality also, even as we speak, is there's what we call envelope budgeting. The police still benefits from what they call envelope budgeting, which is not very good. So what is envelope budgeting? What
Exactly.
envelope budgeting is,
Yeah.
where police brings out their budget to say this is what it will cost us to police Nigeria for 2025.
Okay.
So let's say they say it's 1 billion,
Okay.
right? And so during the appropriation, the Senate looks at, the National Assembly anyway, looks at all the budgets, maybe under Ministry of Interior and the rest of it, and comes up with this idea that for this year, this is the amount of money that will be appropriated for these agencies. Let's say 3 billion. So at the end of the day, what comes to police, let's say maybe from the 1 billion they requested for, could be 500 million. I'm
Mm,
just guessing.
mm,
Now, so of course, you also know that budgets, monies are released to government agencies in tranches. So let's say they release the first tranche. So police is requesting 1 billion. Government is saying, we're giving you, National Assembly is saying, we're giving you 500 million.
mm.
The first tranche, maybe 200 million. Another
Okay.
one, 100 million. Maybe that is where it ends.
Oh,
You understand?
yes.
So police says we need 1 billion. Government says we can only give you 500 million and release the first 200, release the second 100,
And that's
and
it.
that's it.
Ah,
Okay. So it's a difficult one. So somehow people now say you use this foreign aid to augment in terms of training, logistics, and the rest of
exactly.
it.
Yes.
But we also know the same thing also. I am not sure. I don't know about the military because
Mm.
close.
It's a
Yeah.
close knitted circle.
But also sometimes there are trainings that they've been involved in all those things. And some of them will tell you that these trainings are not as effective as they ought to be. There are some donors that they've discussed with and they did some trainings, and they're saying we don't just need training alone.
Okay.
We need equipment.
Equipment.
You need arms and ammunition. We need something to fight. But there's also a level of scrutiny that is required before you can get those things. For example, the issue of Tucano jets that Nigeria has um, been requesting to get for a long time. I don't
Yes.
know whether it's been approved now, but there's also the layers of approvals that needs to be done before those things get to Nigeria and all those things. So if you ask me, we all need to go back to the drawing board.
Mm.
The reality is that this foreign aid is not sustainable. And a lot of people who are experts in finance believe that if the structure of our monies, the way we get our money and distribute our money is transparent, people are accountable, that we can actually sustain the country and govern it very well.
Okay.
So, well, of course, the tap keeps flowing until it is turned off. So, let's say there's a kind of mechanical arrangement that is being done to see whether it's going to be on
But
again.
Dr. Benson, do you think that sometimes it is deliberate that the Nigerian government doesn't also release certain amount of monies needed by various MDAs because they believe that or they know that aids will come to augment?
Well, so this is from my own little understanding now. It's also a function of what is there. The monies that are shared by the FAC, is as a result of receipts. So those who are experts tell us that the revenues that are accrued to the federal government is not enough to fund projects, pay salaries, and the rest of it.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm not an expert in those ones. Okay. The unfortunate thing is that even the one we have also somehow is also looted and diverted.
Okay.
So, but people are saying if we approach it through physical responsibility, through transparency and accountability, that even the one little we have should go around. So there's this argument that even the 2025 budget that has been presented before the National Assembly has some deficit. So you would need loan or whatever in order to be able to, take care of everything that is being requested and all those things.
Okay.
Probably you need an expert to be able to break this down for you. But
okay.
One thing I know is that a lot of revenues is going to the federal government. So much now is going to the state governments with the taxes that has been raised and the rest of it. Some of these monies are not being accounted for because we have what they call security vote. We have all these expenses that one cannot explain. If you look at budget, there's an organization that is called budget that is reviewing all these budgets, and you see what they call extraneous materials. Things you're not sure, but they're in the budget. You don't really understand. Then also all these constituency projects that they insert everywhere, and you're not sure what those things are. So at the end of the day, since we have a problem with our budget in terms of designing it, there's also a problem of implementation. Budget is not implemented the way it ought to be.
Do you also think there is also wastage going on?
Of course, that's a big one. There's wastage. Who doesn't know that there's wastage? And yeah, so there's quite a lot that is happening. And so there'll be more problem when these let's say free money they no longer come the way they're supposed to
Just
be,
come.
because people's eyes will now be open and people will be wondering what is really going on.
Now, talking about an eye opener, Dr. Benson. For local and state governments, what can they do now to, let's say, bridge this funding gap? It seems they are closest to the grassroots, and most aids and most funding, sometimes, especially when it comes to health, goes to the grassroots level where they provide, basic amenities. Sometimes primary healthcare centers, equipment here and there. What can the local and state governments do right now to bridge the gap?
I think they need to look inwards. A lot of people have talked about internally generated revenue. I don't know whether that will solve the problem because Nigerians are also being taxed heavily now. But I've also heard that there's an increase in the money that is received from the federal allocation to different states. And with the judgment of the Supreme Court, there is supposed to be an autonomy for local government areas, which means actually if the money that is earmarked for local governments go to the local governments the way it is proposed to happen, then there's quite some chunk of money that should be at the local government level that can run, whether it's primary health care, whether it's sanitation, whether it's issues and all those things.
Yes,
Also remember that one of the biggest donors of World Health Organization is the US.
it's the US.
And
That's
the
right.
US has just pulled
Pulled out
out
of WHO.
of
Yes.
WHO. So basically, WHO Health Organization is going to have a deficit in funding.
Mm.
So when you talk about primary health care, um, and what obtains at the local government, and then also the current plan government has to employ health fellows in all the 774 local governments. I don't know where the money is coming from, whether it's coming from the federal government or it's whether coming from foreign donors. If it's coming from foreign aid, it might be impacted with what is going on now. So for me, for example, what happened, I think, in a Ebonyi State or something in 2019, they have an insurance, Ebonyi State insurance, where if you contribute a token, you are kind of registered into the insurance, and when you go to the hospital, you benefit from it. So it's like pooling resources together
I
through
agree.
what the National Health Insurance Authority is
Good
doing.
thing most states have taken up that
Yes,
mantle.
most states are
Yes.
trying to take that up. So I think each state should actually look at, and local government, if I can say that, should actually look at what can they do within their locality to improve the welfare
Of
of
the
the people.
people.
Nigerians are not difficult people in the sense that we don't like good things. And when they see good things, they tell you that they tell you that these are good things.
Mm.
So I think it's just a matter of governance. The money that are already coming in, what is it being used for? You know. So people do roads, and people, like just get some boreholes, and they're announcing it. These are basic
Amenities.
amenities that we should have. I mean, for the amounts of money that people are paying. So I don't think that when a road is repaired or when a road is constructed, we should go and be celebrating it. These are basic things that government should provide to our citizens. So whether it's at the local government level, whether it's at the state level, or whether it's at the federal level, I think anybody who is in a position of power has a responsibility to employ the highest level of transparency and accountability in governance.
All right. We're still looking at the impact of US aid suspension on Africa, implications for Nigeria's economy and development. You can be part of the conversation. WhatsApp 0909 697 5943. Now, Dr. Benson, are there alternative funding sources Nigeria can look into, especially for our NGOs, since this USAID, as USAID is cut? What are the potential challenges of such alternatives? Let's say if we decide to source funds from, let's say, I know Germany, has some, releases some funds to Nigeria in terms of aid. We have China doing that as well. Are there consequences or challenges for such alternatives?
Don't also forget that Germany is going in for an election,
So
and
there's a chance that that might also change.
yeah, and some people are also saying that they should vote for um, those who would deport people and all those things. So,
Okay.
and they seem to be very popular these days.
I
So
see. I see.
yeah, so there are quite a number of funding streams from different countries. Um, but what we've also realized over the few years now is that those funds are decreasing. For example, when you had Brexit, it impacted on some organizations who were receiving funding from the EU and the UK government. When there was also a merger between FCO and DFID, Department for International Development and Foreign Commonwealth Office, which is now FCDO. Some organizations also lost some grants, so it's been happening, and over the years, really. Um, European Union also, European Commission, European Union, the funding stream that is usually available in Nigeria somehow has also decreased, especially for non-profit organizations. In the last 3 years, it has not been as it used to be before. Even though some of the funds are still available, but it's not as it used to be before. So there's actually globally, and also if you recall, um, the war in Ukraine and Gaza actually impacted foreign aid.
To
Um,
Africa.
yes, to Africa and also Nigeria.
Mm.
Even though we did a research last year, even though some people also said that. So the war also, what did happen also is that a lot of monies moved to Ukraine. They couldn't absorb it, so some of them
Move to Gaza.
moved to Gaza. Some of them also moved to Nigeria, according to some international humanitarian
Oh,
organizations.
okay.
But the reality is the impact of the war itself shifted funds. That's what they call mopping up. So when funds are available and there's like an emergency,
Mm.
you move it to emergency situation.
Okay.
So
Okay.
several organizations in Nigeria got their fingers burnt because of that mopping up that happened. But
Okay.
probably after some time, within the period that this has happened, some of them also got some grants, but which of course you have like 3-4 months to spend and you are not able to do it and all those things. But the reality is that we have seen a gradual decline of foreign aid to sub-Saharan Africa, and Nigeria is also impacted.
Mm.
And what is happening with USAID now and other US-based organizations is a reality check that we
That we
actually
need
have
to.
to. Yeah. So I cannot say with certainty that whether it's Sweden, whether it's Denmark,
Mm.
whether it's the European Union, yeah, whether it's different, you know, there's what we call ODA, organizational development assistance, where every government every year earmarks some budget for development, outside development and the rest of it. What is increasingly happening from the data that we've received is that those ODAs are gradually being reduced to a
Mm.
drastic, you know, so it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
That's just the reality.
All right.
So what we have started looking at is the possibility of philanthropy within the African system.
Okay.
There are some organizations that are beginning to theorize on the fact that Africa as a country, as a continent itself, actually we have our own indigenous way of supporting ourselves.
Okay.
Through community effort. So people are asking ourselves, why don't we develop this? I mean,
Okay.
we have the Dangotes, we have the Illuminus, we
The
have
Otedolas.
the Otedolas, and well, this crowdfunding is also an Africa thing, actually. The crowdfunding that you have on applications and the rest of it. It's a community effort we do. For example, somebody is getting married, people come together, contribute and support.
That's right.
Burial
Burial
ceremony with. So why don't we do that? To support non-profits that are working hard, are doing something and all those things. It's still in its elemental stage and all those things. But I think the reality is that we just need to think out of the box, realize that this foreign aid is not sustainable, and look at indigenous ways of supporting projects and the rest of it.
All right. Some messages are coming through. This one says, "Good morning to your guest." And the first question says, "If US suspends aid, would the Nigerian government step up to fill the gap, or will citizens just be the one to suffer as usual?" From Adebayo.
The federal government is supposed to step in and fill the gap, but probably at the first term, so you have short term, long term,
Okay.
because people, the issue of HIV/AIDS, it was suspended. So people started crying and said, "What happens to us?" Because people receive antiretroviral and different
That's right.
consumables,
Also for research.
and all those things. But now that was suspended, even though they say there's a waiver now
Yes.
for HIV-related treatments and all those things. So what happens? And
Mm.
I'm also asking what happens.
What happens?
The reality is that those consumables may not be available immediately, because even if those ones that are brought in are quite expensive.
Oh.
So government will have to find a way of bringing them in. So that means probably there's going to be a gap. There's going to be a lot. Likely some people will die.
That's just the reality, which is unfortunate.
But I think there is need for the federal government to start looking at these areas where there are these needs. Don't forget, we still have Lassa fever. We still have cholera.
There's Ebola now.
And then Ebola has creeped up, come up again in Uganda. I've heard that NCDC is requesting all the points in Nigeria where they do testing to activate.
Deactivate. Yes. Yes.
You
That
know,
was in the news today. True.
which means nobody
Funding
is
needs to
trust.
go in.
Yeah. No, what I'm trying to say is that it has not come, but
Yeah.
with the way things are happening,
We're on high alert.
we should be on high alert as things are.
I unfolded.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Fatima says, hello to your guest. Our leaders need to prioritize self sufficiency. We can't keep depending on foreign aid forever. Musa is here, says, hello, good morning to your guest. Thank you so much, Doctor, for your analysis this morning. Says, I'm worried about the impact on security. And since you're an expert, if the US pulls out counterterrorism funding, what happens to the fight against insurgency?
Tough one.
Yeah, that one's from Musa.
I think this question should actually be directed to the Office of the National Security Advisor, right? Okay. But for me, if you ask me, and this is my own personal opinion, the I know the security agencies, armed forces, gets a generous budget from the government.
Okay.
And sometimes they complain that some of the trainings they receive from these donor-related organizations is actually not what they are looking for. What they need is hardware.
Hardware.
And for you to get those hardware, it requires some level of security clearance, and the rest of it. So it's not as if the donor aid is used to purchase those weapons. They could supply some, maybe some already used, and they give to you. But when it comes to clean hardware that is used for combatant or other issues, you need to buy it.
It's still the responsibility of your government.
It's still the responsibility of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to buy those things.
Okay.
Use their money and buy those things.
Okay.
What we've had, the rumor we've had is that during the Buhari administration, that our crude oil was sold into the future. I don't know whether you've heard that.
Yes. So
yeah. I don't know how they want to manage that. But the reality is that question, thank you for that beautiful question. But it should be Office of the National Security Advisor.
All right, Musa, you've been asked to direct your question there. Ungazi is here, says, good morning to your guest. The government should focus on improving local industries and generating internal revenue rather than relying on external funding. Chukemeka says, good morning to Doctor. Good to hear your voice once again. He says, I hope the situation forces African leaders to manage resources better instead of waiting for foreign assistance. And Zainab is asking, if aid is cut, which it has already been cut, will organizations like WHO and EU step in to support critical sectors like healthcare?
Well, they're already supporting. So the EU is already supporting some critical sectors. The only thing also is that they cannot just do everything. There's also a responsibility for the federal government to step up, because the citizens are Nigerian citizens.
Okay.
So we cannot just sit down and say we are waiting for outside help when we can help ourselves. That's number one. Number two is that, like I rightly pointed out in the beginning, World Health Organization receives most of our funding, not all. I mean, chunk part of our funding from the United States.
Yes.
So if the United States has cut her budget, it's no longer a member of
WHO. Yes.
That means that their budget will be impacted.
Wow.
So that also means that the monies we receive from them
would also be reduced.
Likely go down, yes.
Wow.
Well,
Zainab, that's your answer. This one says, good morning. Good morning. Foreign aid is helpful, but it also comes with conditions that may not always favor Nigeria. Maybe it's time we rethink our dependence on it. That's from Samuel. Also, this one's coming from Glory, says, hello, I fear that cutting aid might lead to job loss, just like he said, especially for NGOs and development projects. And she said, my question to your guest is, what about when we hear issues of fraud within the NGO system? Do you think this led to cutting of aid from the US?
No, it's not. The reality is that there are layers of what you call fraud. There are organizations that are one-man-led organizations, basket organizations and portfolio organizations.
Okay.
Donors are very strict with their monies. They do a lot of tests, a lot of whatever before they are giving money. And like I also said, even when you are giving money, they try to follow up on how those monies are utilized. So there have been instances where organizations that received money and were not able to account for it have been blacklisted.
Okay.
And when you are blacklisted by an international organization, it's very difficult for you to get back.
Okay.
And they relate with each other.
Okay.
So if you're blacklisted by this, of course, your name goes to this one and nobody gives you money again.
Okay.
So those are very documented. There's also a regulatory framework in Nigeria that tries to ensure that organizations play within the rules. And we also have this issue that's coming up now in terms of self-regulation, where organizations are trying to self-regulate. Um, but it's not as a result of in quote fraud,
Fraud. Okay.
because it's dealt with in different layers, whether by the federal government or the organizations given the money. What is happening is that the US government, the current US government, doesn't believe that all the monies that has released, to foreign entities and foreign governments should be released.
Yes. Okay.
So they are trying to do a review with the understanding of that America first. So those releases that go to different countries are not in the best interest of America first,
Okay.
might likely be ended.
Ended. Okay.
But the ones that they still need to do, because of course, when your neighbor is hungry, you are also hungry.
You're also hungry because you must somehow it will be affected.
The hunger of your neighbor might also affect
Affect
your
you.
own peace.
Yes.
So that is it.
Okay.
So there is also that argument of reparation and the rest of it and all those things. So it's just as a result of change of government. This normally you understand.
Yes.
So China is increasing their footprint, let me call that,
Okay.
in Africa, even also Russia. I mean, if you look at what is happening in geopolitics, especially with West African countries, some of them that are no longer members of ECOWAS. So the reality is that, and interestingly, China also doesn't come up with this issue of human rights. Before we give you money, we must see evidence of human rights and the rest of it. China is not so much interested in issues of human rights. So there's quite an increase. But how substantial that increase, I'm not really sure, because I've not received the Chinese money before.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe those who have received, but I know they are heavily into infrastructure.
Okay.
So there is this bilateral understandings where they are helped upgrade and the rest of it. But some African countries have also had their fingers burnt in terms of understandings with Chinese government. Because some of them have had their properties confiscated over loan agreements that were not repaid and the rest of it. So I don't know the kind of agreement that the federal government is entering with Chinese government in terms of infrastructure development.
Okay.
Is it an understanding that they'll build and run and then give back, or are they giving us loan and we have to pay back? So I am not an expert in that,
okay.
But the reality is that there's quite a lot of Chinese footprint in Africa, and Nigeria is also benefiting from that. But the terms of those engagements, I'm not really sure.
All right. Well, Dr. Benson, time well spent and fast spent. But your final words as we wrap up. Also, there's been a call about not just talking about the fact that our government needs to step up. As a stakeholder, what's your major advice when you have meetings right now from this point? Where do we need to move? How do we need to move away from just receiving aid to actually managing our situations ourselves in terms of self-sufficiency?
I think we need to pay more attention to the budget cycle in Nigeria. The activities of the National Assembly now is not just enough. I think the budget should be broken down that everybody understands it, the way it runs, the way we are impacted, and the way funds are released. I think every Nigerian has a responsibility to understand Nigerian budgeting cycle, and actually be the eye and the ears of the federal government, the state government, or the local government in terms of how monies are spent.
Okay.
So if you're spending money for road infrastructure, was that money budgeted for road infrastructure? If you're using it to buy antiretroviral drugs, was it supposed to be used for antiretroviral drugs? If you're buying, how many was budgeted for? How many has been bought? How many women are pregnant? How many of them go for cesarean section? So there is this data that we need to use to run the economy. That is the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. They keep releasing data every day. But the question is, how effective is the data that is produced in Nigeria? Because I know somebody in the National Assembly, I'm not sure who it is, that was saying, how can we every year we are budgeting for forks, knives, spoons, and the rest of it? How do we need to buy these things every year? That's a good question.
That's a good question.
So Nigeria should be asking questions. The money that is earmarked for A, B, C, and D in 2025, should we go to 2026 and still earmark the same money for A, B, and C? That's the question. So every day you see cars, you see this, you see that. Do they have to buy those every year? Are they recurrent expenditures? So I'm not an expert in budgeting, but I know that there's a way this thing can be explained to an ordinary person, and we understand, yes, this year you're buying this, probably the money you need is for maintenance and not to buy another
Oh,
one,
exactly.
because at the end of the day, probably nobody's buying anything. These monies
Oh,
are going abroad
oh my
in
God.
some hard currencies. Because also notice every month, whenever monies are being paid, there's if you go to Zen 4, you ask yourself, what do they do there? I end there.
You decided to end it on that note. Thank you so much, Dr. Bensi Olugbo. We appreciate you. He's a current managing partner at Bensi Olugbo and Company. Thank you so much for taking us, taking us through this a very, very interesting conversation. And
Thank you.
also, it's been an eye opener. We really do appreciate you. And as a stakeholder, like I said, please continue to speak for us. That's all we can actually, beg for. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.